They were doing fast action sequences through rural dirt roads, which are in the outskirts of India. So there's a lot of fecal matter and God knows what else besides that dengue.
Oh, my stars.
And we just leaned into risk like Netflix does and shot there for 3 weeks, but we had to build out a really robust safety plan.
Yeah.
And the producer of the movie was at the hospital so much checking on crew members that had dengue, they ended up setting up a little room for him.
Oh my gosh.
So on my side, I was terrified that I had a show in India with crew members who are precious cargo over
Yeah.
there getting sick. And I ended up getting on a plane and going out there myself, just showing support and trying to get out of that small town as soon as we could.
Welcome to The Practical Filmmaker, an educational podcast brought to you by the Filmmaker Institute and Sunscreen Film Festival, where industry professionals talk nuts and bolts and the steps they took to find their success today. On today's show, Noelle Green takes us into her job as a director of physical production at Netflix, what that looks like, and how the company is working towards inclusion in the industry. Find the full transcripts and more at thepracticalfilmmaker.com. I'm your host, Tanya Musgrave, and today we have Noelle Green, one of the directors of physical production for the series team at Netflix. You can see some of her work as executive in charge of production on films such as Extraction, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, The Irishman, Bird Box, Always Be My Maybe, and many, many, many more. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, fill us in. How did you get where you are today? I know it's a very loaded question.
I have been in the business for probably about 25, 30 years now. And I did 20 years of freelance before I became a studio exec. So, assistant on different shows all over the United States. And then I became an executive maybe about 10 years ago. So now I am switching over to series.
That was a very recent thing, yes?
Starting today.
So, okay, for right now, I'm familiar with the production side of things. Definitely more on the indie side, but I'm getting to the point where I'm in more of the producing and managerial side in that role. However, the majority of us are unfamiliar with the executive side and what that actually looks like. So, what pieces of the machine do you connect together? Like, what wouldn't work if your job didn't exist?
We do the budgeting and boarding process. We do the oversight of that with the producers, and then we oversee the whole production period. So they would still make the movie without me, but the studio side, that would be the missing beat as an exec overseeing the actual making of the production from a schedule and budget point of view.
Mm-hmm. So when you said that you were on the series team, does that look like all of you on one project? Does that look like one of you on your own projects? Are you all kind of facing in your own corners, or is there like a whole team of you working on one project?
There is about 50 people on the series team, and there's about 10 of me, and we all get our own slew of shows. I've just started on the team, so I don't know exactly how many I'll have, but I'm guessing it'll be 5 to 8 shows in the new year.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, lots of content, lots of people at Netflix.
Yeah, yeah. I know it was only your first day, but and so I don't know how much of a comparison you'd be able to pull, but what kind of changes do you see on the horizon from, doing films to series?
The pace is very different. So when you get on a film, you're just making one show and it's an hour and a half long and it can take 6 months to a year or longer. Series is coming in and you may be making 6 or 10 mini movies back to back to back. So one is done, it goes into post and starts rolling, and you need to pick up the second one. So there's a higher turnover and a much faster pace in television.
What is your specific role now then? I mean, like what's kind of like your typical day? Are you talking with, more agents? Are you talking more with the talent, or, like how or like the directors and the above the line and all of that fun stuff? Are you putting the team together, or are you talking more with other producers rather than production? I don't know.
I'm mostly talking with the producer of the movie and finding out each day to day, how is the pace going? Are you hiring crew? Who are you bringing on for your department heads? Are you building sets? Are you looking for practical locations? And how's that looking for your scheduling and budgeting plan?
Mhm.
Because they come up with the schedule and the budget in the very beginning, and then they try to stick within those parameters throughout the prep and shoot period.
Mhm. How much veto power do you have?
I have some veto power. If
Yeah.
they're doing something that is not safe on set, maybe it's an
Mm.
action sequence that has a couple beats that are outside of the true safety parameters, we push
Yeah.
back. We have a lot of COVID protocols now, as you can imagine.
Mhm.
They're not popular on set, but we
Mhm.
need them in order to keep our shows running. So pushing back on people trying to change the rules. We
Yeah.
have we have some veto power, but the truth is we like to give our partners a lot of creative freedom.
Mm.
I think there's a lot of joy in the Netflix partnership through that.
Mhm.
We have veto power, but I would say we don't use it as much as we could, or we don't want to.
I'm actually really interested in your journey because at least from the IMDb stalking that I did, your first listed productions were like Shooter and Indiana Jones. So like even under your the additional crew section where like people put their throwaway roles, like go back in the 90s, there was still like Almost Famous and The X-Files. So like all big names. Can you take us back to the beginning?
So it's all about getting your foot in the door for the first time and then proving yourself and showing who you are. So I started out as an assistant. My first movie was Heart and Souls, and it was probably 94, 95. It was a long, long time ago.
Mm.
And I did dry cleaning runs. I took care of my boss's dogs. I did all kinds of things in the assistant role. And what I really did, though, was in any downtime was I studied the set and I studied the departments on the set, and I was watching the department heads, all with the purpose of, I wonder what I'll be good at. I wonder what will be appealing to me, but also making sure I understand how the wheel spins.
Mhm.
So I was an assistant on several movies. I also did Higher Learning, which was great. We were on a college campus a lot for that movie and just learned about like all the sets and moving around and everything that goes into just your day-to-day work, your prop department prepping, your costume department prepping. I fell in love with the overall process, and I knew I wanted to become a producer myself, not the creative kind who goes out and finds the script and the director, but the production kind, the line producer who you hire to budget and schedule and oversee your production period. So after several movies as an assistant, I moved into the production office. And once I was in the production office, that department I call Grand Central Station. You take care of all the different departments on the show. And through that process, I knew more and more I wanted to continue to be part of the overall eyes on the show. And I've just moved up since then and on X-Files and Memoirs of a Geisha, some of my movies from the 90s.
Mm.
I was a production coordinator. I was in the office. I was reporting to the producers, and I just slowly moved my way up.
Does that include joining a union? Were you part of that?
I was part of a union. My particular position in the office wasn't a union position in the beginning of my career, but it became one. And I did join the union and was part of that until I joined the studio system.
Is it possible to get to a managerial side of things without joining a union? Is that even possible?
Absolutely. To become a studio exec, you don't need to be in the union. You just need to get your foot in the door at the studio and
Yeah.
then start to work your way up. The unions just cover many of the positions on a movie set,
Mhm.
but nothing outside of that when it comes to the studios.
So, for those who would love to kind of follow in these footsteps for a more managerial side on a studio side, kind of like being able to oversee more, where could you see some potential entry points for those people?
There are a million assistant and PA jobs out there, and that's the foot in the door for everybody. Don't turn any PA job or assistant down, because both of those positions, you're reporting to people who are overseeing the show, and you get that purview of all those different departments.
Mhm.
And when you become a PA or an assistant, you can either do it on a set and learn the mechanics of how a set runs the day in and day out, or you can go to a production company or a studio
Mm-hmm.
and be part of the team that oversees the process, the money.
I can't say that many people who get into film are that excited about the accounting side of things necessarily. Man, I've been trying to think of other roles that, we could have on this show too, and I'm just like, all right, who do we not hear from? It's like the accountants and, that kind of thing. What other jobs are there that really have nothing to do with, like knowing what gaff tape is or, like that kind of thing?
The accounting department is another part of Grand Central Station. Every single department has a role on the show, and you can't make a movie without one of the departments. But the money and accounting is the absolute hub of where everything happens. And the accountant works closely with the producer. So when the producer sits down, they schedule the movie, but then they have to flush out a budget and figure how much it is to make it. And they do that in partnership with an accountant. And the closer they work together, the producer starts focusing more on the overall prep of the movie, where the accountant is number crunching
Mm-hmm.
and putting in, there's 30 departments on a show. Every department hands in a budget, putting in those numbers. They have a whole team of people who has to help put in that information and then pay the bills. Accounting is like the quiet hero in the background.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see their work, you don't hear their work, but it's splashed all over screen because we couldn't afford anything without them.
So I know that you are more on the side of the Netflix originals. Do you guys ever work with indie filmmakers, or is that something more along the lines of acquisitions?
We do it all at Netflix, and there's a million different divisions that cover all of that. So there is an indie film division, and they
Mhm.
do, right now, they're doing movies that are 50 million and below,
Mhm.
but there's a part of the team that really focuses on the true indies that are like $5 to $15 million.
Mhm.
And then within that indie team, some of the execs handle acquisitions.
Mhm.
So while some are overseeing $15 million originals, there's others that are going out to film festivals and meeting with agents and looking
Mm.
for indie work that needs a distribution deal.
Yeah.
And then you've got the studio films, and those are 50 million to 300 million, and it goes
Gotcha.
on.
I actually have a question, a listener question that piggybacks on that. So, a listener question from our Instagram at Practical Filmmaker. They wanted to know, what is the department to approach to get a show or a movie on Netflix?
There is a submission email because Netflix gets so many submissions.
Got it?
I don't know that, but I can get you that information.
Okay, all right. Yeah, and we can link that in the show notes as well. I don't know. It just kind of seems like this elusive unicorn to get a show on Netflix.
There is so many submissions that they do require you either submit through an agent
Hmm.
or this email that I need to give you.
Tell me about Ion.
Oh, this is the best. My favorite thing about Netflix is that it's so different from all the studios that if you see a hole in the business and there's a way you can build support to make that hole full, they encourage it.
Yeah.
So there was a group of us that wanted to do more inclusion work,
Mm.
and they said, okay, what do you want to do? And we formed a group called ION, which stood for Inclusion Outreach Network. And we did a lot of incredible events and partnerships for several years. We were so successful that the company decided to hire someone. We're all employees with full-time jobs
Yeah.
that are doing this on the side.
Yeah.
They took it so seriously, they ended up hiring a woman named Tiffany Burrell Lewis, who is now running an inclusion program for the below the line portion
Wow.
of the company. So all the productions. ION's main purpose was to help get underrepresented people their foot in the door. So whether it was going to schools and talking to young children about opportunities, or
Wow.
going to colleges and setting up recruiting, or what I was really focusing was freelance crew members on our sets. And we
Mm.
have worldwide sets, so there's thousands and thousands of people on our sets every day. Let's help create more opportunity for underrepresented to get that opportunity and break up that historical, Joe's brother's cousin sister
Mhm.
is going to
Mhm.
get the break,
Yeah.
and give everybody that open door and that opportunity. So training programs, workshops, seminars,
Wow.
grassroots search, looking for people, everything we can do to help find talent
Mhm.
and help build them a bridge to the bigger side of the business.
Is that also casting?
Casting too. I
Wow.
focus primarily on crew because I'm production and I'm below the
Okay.
line.
Yeah,
But a
yeah.
lot of the creative executives that focus on story
Uh-huh.
and characters are working on getting more inclusivity as well.
Okay, I mean, I know not everybody is going to be able to actually see your face when you're saying this, but you positively lit up when you started talking about Ion, for sure. I mean, like that's great to be so passionate about something that's so needed, because I would have to say personally, and I don't think about it too much because I was fortunate to have a mother in leadership, so being a leader was not ever anything foreign to me. And I just a little background. I don't know. I was adopted into a Caucasian family.
Me
And
too.
wait, what?
Me
Stop.
too.
And so I mean, I don't know if you had this kind of experience, but I wasn't taught to look for anything, so I never let anything really bother me when it came to getting the jobs that I wanted to get. It was just like, all right, this needs to happen, so I'm going to go after it. And I guess like people just didn't really question, right?
Yeah.
And I don't even remember like the first time I kind of even saw something on screen that halfway even represented a story kind of like mine was it was, a summer Netflix thing. It was To All the Boys I Loved Before.
Mm.
Lana Condor, I remember looking her up because I mean, she was an Asian lead, and it wasn't even really a thing. It wasn't made into a thing. It wasn't like, oh, she's an Asian actress. But
Yeah.
then I looked it up, and she too was adopted into a Caucasian family. I'm just like, this is the first time that I've ever seen anybody that was like me. I mean, and I didn't really even think about it. I mean, because I don't know. I'm curious what your experience was, especially because I know this now. That's crazy.
Isn't that incredible? I have so many things to say, but one thing you said was
Yeah,
you were talking about leadership and how you were
yeah,
raised with a mother that's a leader.
yeah.
Me too. And there's so many kids out there that don't have that, that I see
Yes.
that as my role to be
Yeah.
that woman speaking up for them and saying, you are smart enough. You
Mhm,
are bright enough. The color of your skin doesn't matter. We
mhm,
want your brain. We just want
mhm.
the best brains, the best possible people
Yeah.
for the job. And I was raised with more of that sprinkled in, but not everybody is. And so
Mhm.
there's so much work that has to be done to get everybody in the same bowl and working together.
Yeah.
But I think also just being a person of color adopted into a white family,
Mhm.
you see more possibilities and inclusion because you grew up in it, as long as your parents did it right.
It's a very interesting thing because a lot of the discussions that have been happening the last few years, I've almost not known where to insert myself, you know? Because you know and understand that side of things, you know so much more of the culture behind it that every single culture has its pitfalls. We're one big family that, and like family can be like, like the most confounding thing on earth. You're just like, you don't understand necessarily why it is the way you are, but you kind of stick through it and you're just like, oh, wait, like that's kind of the importance of the family is that you communicate and you stick together and like you're all surviving it, and not only surviving it, you're thriving
Yeah.
together because of your differences. And a lot of the conversations regarding, inclusion and stuff like that, I was just like, I'm so thankful for it because I've had more people now. The latest one that I think of is a professor I was talking with. We were putting something together. It was a documentary panel, and he was a documentarian. And so I was just like, hey, do you mind moderating this panel? And he's white male. He's the one that told me, he's just like, hey, I just wanted to bring it to your attention that there are no females on this panel. And they're also all white. And I wanted to just let you know that it's something that I noticed, and I think that we can figure something out. And I don't necessarily think of myself as the end all be all. So if you want somebody else to moderate this. And I was just like, oh my gosh, you're so right. Because I wasn't like, in some ways, I feel like it's a good thing that I'm just like, oh, I wasn't even thinking about it because it was just documentary. You were thinking like, you're a documentarian, be a documentarian. But 100%. Oh my gosh. As soon as I saw the lineup, I'm just like, this is a problem.
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
a major problem.
yeah.
So, yes, the amount of conversation that you can spark through initiatives like Ion is fantastic. So, are you still involved with that?
We decided
Kelsey?
to dissolve Ion, but not the work. So we
Okay.
didn't need Ion anymore because now Tiffany Burrell
Oh,
Lewis has a
okay.
team,
Okay.
and she's got full-time staffers that are, their job is to come up with initiatives and programs for more inclusion on our productions
Wow.
globally. There's
Yeah.
teams globally working on it. So I think it will be highly elevated in the
Mhm.
next year or two. We have real opportunity to step up, I think, and lead the way that Netflix likes to and is good at.
If you are a person of color or a minority, what is a good way to kind of tap into those resources that Netflix is providing?
We're coming up with all these programs. We're going out and we're looking for people,
Mhm.
but where can they come if they're looking for us? Who can they
Mhm.
reach out to? Tiffany's building out her structure. So over time, I'm sure there will be a place they can come to Netflix.
Mhm.
I'm underrepresented. I'm looking for opportunities or training. Where do I go?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But for now, we're outward facing, looking for people.
One of the parts of the show is where we ask about tools of your trade, and Gear and Gadget says, like, old reliables and stuff like that. But I'm also really curious about your favorite resources, like what you use in your job and what resources you pull from.
It's interesting. Netflix likes to build a lot of internal tools and collect data.
Mm.
So I was at another company before that didn't do that, and you would be on IMDb searching for crew. You'd be just doing a lot of search through external search engines. At Netflix, they have an app called Origin Story, and you can look up any movie, any TV show that was ever made at Netflix, and look up all the information about the show.
Oh my gosh,
So
this sounds
my biggest
fascinating.
resource is internal, but I also use IMDb quite a
Yeah.
bit when we're looking for people.
Mhm.
I read Deadline every day to make sure I'm caught up on industry news. I
Mhm.
read Variety, I read Hollywood Reporter.
Mhm.
Are you talking about general resources or inclusive resources, everything?
Anything that you thought of. I like, there are some people that was just like, oh, this social media account is like actually really good for this. Or, sometimes there's software that people are just like, hey, yeah, this app is actually really, really useful. The main things that I usually ask are gear and gadgets, like what's your old reliable, and then what's your new reliable, your new favorite one that revolutionizes how you work.
It's interesting for me. Origin Story isn't at any of the other studios. So I've been at Netflix for 5 years, but that's my favorite tool.
Yeah.
They now have another tool, and this is internal again,
Yeah.
but it ingests our wrap report every day. So how many hours did you shoot? How many pages did you shoot?
Oh,
And we can look at all our projects and average out
wow.
what our days are looking like. And that's helpful
Wow.
information to just see how we're doing overall as a company.
And then maybe this is a developer question, but what is the closest thing that you can think of that would be available for filmmakers wanting a similar tool that's not available?
Oh,
origin
that
origin stories, man, that sounds like an incredible thing just to just like I'd be so fascinated to read any of those. That's awesome.
they're all internal tools. So I'm
Mhm.
sorry to say Netflix likes to get
Yes.
data and to keep data.
Yes, yes.
And to, of course, share it externally as we learn over time.
How much do you think that that's going to stick around? Not the apps and the internal tools and stuff like that, but I'm part of a Facebook group for distributors, and it's for indie filmmakers who are looking for distributors and aggregators and all that fun stuff. And to talk about, hey, are they a good distributor, or like, no, stay away, and people just looking out for each other. And it's no secret that Netflix likes its secrets, right? And I'm just curious how long, or if you think that that is going to be a sustainable thing, for filmmakers who might just get frustrated at the fact that like they won't let me see any of my stats, like how well it's performing, or how much it could earn, or like how many views I got. So there's streaming services that are coming out the wazoo. Everybody's got them up to their eyeballs. So how sustainable do you feel like that is?
I feel like it'll be forced out and we'll have our box office report once. I don't know if it'll be Netflix or another company that starts to report their numbers first,
Mhm.
but Netflix has been sharing information with filmmakers. I would say maybe it's not public, so it's
Mhm.
not trickling out to Variety or Hollywood
Gotcha.
Reporter, but the
Gotcha. Yeah.
filmmakers themselves,
Hmm.
they're hearing performance reports. But
Okay.
again, I would say that Netflix is keeping it on the quieter side. But like we just had our biggest opener ever in the film site, Red Notice.
Oh, yeah.
So I know they're sharing their big wins and their successes. And
Hmm.
like Squid Game this year, they shared the high level of success of that. And the most exciting thing about that show to me is global viewership and
Yeah.
the appreciation for global content.
Hmm.
And that's, to me, the biggest magic of Netflix
Wow.
is they are literally bringing the world together
Yeah.
through content. And it's all through, subbing and dubbing. We can watch any content from anywhere and appreciate it at the same level.
Because there's really so much. I remember talking to any of my friends that might have been from Australia or Europe or, like it usually starts off as something like, oh, how can you imitate the American accent so well? I can't even even try. And they're just like, oh, because you guys have media everywhere. And like you guys are the ones that have, all the TV shows and all the movies. And so, we grew up watching your stuff. But I've always been curious. There are so many markets outside of ours. There was actually one of your, I guess, colleague, but in a completely other department, who had talked about the Latinx community being the biggest untapped
Content.
content, but also audience. Yeah, the biggest
Yes,
untapped audience that
yes.
nobody has successfully really tapped into. um, and what can be done about that, because you need, I mean, again, like through the Tiffany, is it through the efforts
Mhm.
of Tiffany and stuff like Ion. I mean, that's how you do it. Like you tap into it by getting those people in those positions that can say, actually, this is the right way that you do this.
La Casa de Papel is Spanish language content, and it's one of
Okay.
our biggest shows at Netflix.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's been a Latin explosion. There
Uh-huh.
needs to be many, many more. But
Yeah.
we also have a creative executive
Mm.
named Paco
Mm-hmm.
that went from the Spanish office to Mexico. And I know there's a lot brewing down there.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to come.
Yeah. That's incredible.
And just the way they made La Casa globally popular, and there's a show out of Germany called Dark that went globally popular,
Wow.
and now Squid Game
Yeah.
out of Korea, I
Yeah.
think we'll see some incredible Latin content continue to expand.
I've been loving seeing the diversity that is on there in your cast. And from what it sounds like now, I mean, all the way up to the top where it needs to be as well. So, okay, this is another question. Tell me a story of when something went wrong and what you did to fix it or grow from it.
I will say more of a challenge than something that went wrong. And in it being a challenge, stuff went wrong. We shot part of Extraction in India.
Mm.
And very few foreigners have ever gone in India and said, we're going to do like a 50, 60-day shoot. It's usually you get in, you get the exteriors you need, and you get back out again. That's because there's not a huge structure on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
We went into India. We were in Mumbai, and that was one thing. Then we went further away to a town called Ahmedabad. It's the dengue capital of India.
Oh, no.
So that's where it gets a little crazy, and maybe that's where we went wrong. We took a crew into the dengue capital of India
Oh, no.
and had people on the crew getting dengue.
Oh,
And they were doing fast action sequences through rural dirt roads, which are in the outskirts of India. So there's a lot of fecal matter and God knows what else besides that dengue.
oh my stars.
And we just leaned into risk like Netflix does and shot there for 3 weeks, but we had to build out a really robust safety plan. And the producer of the movie was at the hospital so much checking on crew members that had dengue, they ended up setting up a little room for him.
Oh my gosh.
So on my side, I was terrified that I had a show in India with crew members who are precious cargo over
Yeah.
there getting sick. And I ended up getting on a plane and going out there myself and just showing support and trying to get out of that small town as soon as we could.
Are there waivers for that? Like, what do you have the crew do?
No, there's not waivers for that. When you're there, you're just there, you're in the environment and you're leaning into risk fully.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the company's responsibility and the producers to make sure everyone's being as safe as possible. How do you give the director everything he wants? It was a he, but make sure your crew is safe and happy. So it was nail biting. People at Netflix remember me telling stories in meetings, but I finally did get on a plane and go out there and, showed studio support.
One thing that happened in the last little bit was a bit of a sidestep in the industry when it came to an almost strike with crew safety and that kind of thing. And I talked with a friend who is again more on the executive side of things, and for him it was more a breathe a sigh of relief because they're not going to strike. We have our workers, we can carry on with stuff. But then you have the crew members who are on the ground who are just saying, like, there's nothing that's very much different. What are your thoughts on how that would affect things?
We're aware of all things safety, but first and foremost is the hours. Because the shorter, more efficient day you have, people can go home and see family and be happy and get rest and come back to work rested and feeling good about their workday. We were very supportive in the change of work hours that came out of the negotiations with the AMPTP. What I noticed, the most important thing is the studio stand behind it. But you know what's even more important than that? The director and the producers on the ground executing it. So I can say, make sure your crew gets 12-hour turnaround. That's a studio stance. But we have hundreds of shows globally. We don't have a microscope on them. We trust our partners. We need to know that they are on the ground, making sure they're implementing all of the safety rules directly themselves. Yeah. They're the ones that fought for it and wanted for it, and they actually have to make sure they're implementing it on set. And we need that strong partnership to make sure it's happening.
I'd have to speak up here and say that it's also important to speak up. I mean, I think that talking with some of the more seasoned veterans of the industry, they were talking about, like, I've kind of noticed a shift where these kids are coming up and they're not afraid. They're not afraid to stand up and say, "Hey, you're being ridiculous. You need to give us enough hours so we can be safe." And I love to preach boundaries on this on this show. So it is good to hear from somebody at Netflix that it's something that you guys stood behind.
Very high priority.
The last listener question we have from Instagram is, what is the most challenging part of your job?
People managing. Between the producers that I work with, my staff that works for me, all the Netflix partners I have cross-functionally. It's making sure people are informed, communicated with, heard, and managed in a way where you're delivering good, bad information, where they're hearing you and it's resonating and you're figuring out a resolution. A lot of my job is putting out fires every day. So it's going and talking to people, figuring out what the problem is, and resolving it. And it's all people management. And it's tough because whatever their personality is, whether they're tough or really kind, you just have to be making sure. It's important to me, honestly, that people are happy at work and feeling good every day. And that is an effort on my part, especially when I keep saying this, but there's a lot of good things happening and bad things. Or I have to say, you can't have this, or you can't go there. The show can't do this. We can't give you more money. Managing those conversations.
Yeah.
And I say it's tough because it's the most important part of the job. And it can be really tricky at times.
On a very, very, very small micro scale of what you're talking about, I produced an indie, like micro budget indie feature this summer, and getting everybody who is wanting to go in a certain direction in some ways it is the most joyous thing to be able to like, hey, you want to go in this direction? Well, like not only will you go in this direction, but you're going to do it 150%. Like go be you. And it's awesome, right? And then having those other conversations, you have to be tough as nails to be in your job.
As a woman and as a woman of color, I know that I'm seen differently, but I walk in the room like I'm not. So when I walk in the room and there's the producers and the director, I know they're thinking, oh, it's a woman. Oh, it's a woman of color. But I always say, get your foot in the door and then show them what you got. Because I walk in like, I know I'm equal and I know as much as you all. And I sit at the table. And once I start talking, I see people kind of relax and their shoulders drop like, okay, she's not going to be a girly girl or she's not going to mother me or whatever was going through their minds.
Mm-hmm. You're there to get a
And it
job done.
softens. Yeah. Somebody said to me when I first became a production supervisor, I was sitting at my desk and I had about 10 grown men in my office arguing about staffing for their departments, 2 different departments. One of them got pissed at the group and was like, we shouldn't all be in here getting frustrated and talking to Noelle like this. And he walked out of the room. And I finally resolved it with the guys and they left. And I went home and said to a friend that night, told them the whole story. And they said, did you realize when you were talking to this group, they were all white men, that they were looking at a Black woman sitting on the other side of the chair? Of course, it crossed my mind, but I didn't let it change my process or the way I acted or anything I did. And that's just something I have to deal with probably every day, being in a higher level management position.
Yeah, I've frequently found myself sitting in a meeting, and again, it's not something that crosses my mind that often, but then they'll mention something about like, oh, ha ha ha, like we'll get the other, like pieces of the team together and all that stuff, and I'll look around at our team and I'm just like, oh, I'm the only female.
And
And
I
not
belong here.
I belong here. Yeah, and it's kind of weird to say that. I really appreciate what you had to say about that, because I was up for a professor position, and I ended up going in a different direction because it was a different time in my life, and I was talking with one of the students, and I was just like, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to take this gig, but it would have been great to see you around more often, that kind of thing. She was like, there aren't really a lot of female role models that we have around the school yet. And it would have been cool to just see from a female professor what
Yeah.
life would be like. And I didn't really even think about it until then, that, oh, that's something, you know? That's definitely something. Like there are people who are going through this, and we're half of the industry, or
We
we
have a
could
long way to
but
go.
like we do have a long way to go to even get to half, but
Yeah.
but yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for your thoughts on
Yeah.
that. What questions should I have asked you?
I like that we talked about inclusion stuff and being a woman because I think that that is a hot topic that can't go anywhere. And I think that the Me Too movement broke down walls that won't go back up. It's like the Berlin Wall.
Mm,
George Floyd's death made an impact that should have been made a long time ago, but it's also knocked down walls. We got to make sure those walls don't go back up.
mhm,
So we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep it top of discussion in the bigger meetings.
mhm.
And we have to help keep getting people in the door, training, educating, and putting out that olive branch. And it really scares me to think things could ever go back to the way they were. I don't want these years of inclusion to be a trend. I want it to be a permanent systemic change in our society.
Mhm.
That's why my face lit up when you talked about inclusion, because I never thought in my lifetime that I would see these kinds of changes. So I just want to help make sure they don't go away, and that your generation and the younger generations grasp onto that and just keep the doors open. They can never close again.
That was a fantastic closing statement, but I must ask you this anticlimactic question. How do people find you or follow your work? Shameless plug up.
How do they find me or follow my work? I'm on Instagram at NoelleDG16.
And then like what project are you excited about right now?
I just moved over to series. So on the film side, I was working on Extraction 2, very excited. They're going to elevate the action beyond belief.
Mhm.
And there's a project with Bradley Cooper called Maestro that is a passion project that will be at all the award shows when that one launches. It's just beautiful. Ma Rainey is one of my favorite projects that I did. So that's been out, but near and dear to my heart. The series team that I'm going to join now, I'm part of the overall deals team. And the overall deals that are part of that team are, I know the Obamas have Higher Ground, Regina King just signed,
Wow.
21 Laps, and the Duffer Brothers, who make Stranger Things, Harry and Meghan.
Wow.
All kinds of exciting deals. So I
Yeah.
can't wait to get over there.
It sounds incredible. We cannot wait to see what you have next. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. I really appreciate the things you had to say.
It was really fun talking with you. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this interview, follow us right here and on Instagram, ask us questions, and check out more episodes at thepracticalfilmmaker.com. Be well and God bless. We'll see you next time on The Practical Filmmaker.